It's the height of the red deer stalking season. We're back on the hill for a year in the life of red deer, part 2. And we're devoting the whole of this week's show to that one subject. Welcome to Fieldsports Britain. We return to Ardnamurchan at one of the busiest times of the year. Neil, Stevie and the rest of the West Highland hunting team are flat out. Clients are flying in from all over the world for an opportunity to shoot a Scottish red stag.
I think it's almost a spiritual thing. It takes them back to the origin of what we are. We're not by nature an urban dweller that goes to supermarkets. We were very much part of the land. And I think Scotland ranks in the top 2 or 3 destinations in the world to have this sort of experience.
They're a month into the stag season and just a few weeks before the start of the rut. Britain's largest land mammal is in its prime, antlers fully formed and hardened, ready for battle and ready for the next chapter in A Year in the Life of Red Deer.
To the right of the pole where the green grass goes all the way down and the stream goes through the fence.
For Thomas and his friends, it's their first Highland deer stalking experience. They're from Germany and booked this week's stalking after meeting Neil at Jagd und Hund, a hunting fair in Dortmund.
In a sense, it fulfills everything for me because it's ethical to do this type of hunting on the one hand. But on the other hand, it's also, you really immerse into the nature, become part of it in order to get close to the deer.
The German group are not looking for massive beasts, but good representative animals. The heads will probably end up on their walls, so in that regard they are trophy hunting. It's a term now hijacked by some to portray the worst of hunting.
It's almost developed an element of being toxic. And to us, taking a stag that's past his best and keeping his head as a memento on the wall, it's something that we've done since our very early beginnings as a species. And we have no problem with it. It's a celebration really of his life. And the biggest enemy of a deer is another deer. So by keeping that population in balance, we keep the habitat that they rely on in good condition. So it's just a natural cycle.
The stags appear more numerous than on previous visits and on lower slopes. We intercept this group heading back to the forest.
So what we're looking at here is good quality, or a selection of young stags. Most of these stags are in the 3 to 4 year old age class. The guy on the far left, when we look at him, we can see that he's 4 years old and he's a 14 pointer. Immediately to his right is another 4-year-old 10 pointer. Then there's probably a shootable stag next year, which is an irregular 9. Then there's 2 young 10s immediately to the right. But these are stags that, with the exception of the 9-10 pointer, which will probably come away next year or the year after, these are all the big stags of 4 years from now. So with the rut just getting started, these boys have been out raking around all night, and this is them just making their way back into woodland cover. You can see that stag sniffing at the tail end of the hinds there. Did you see it? Now deer have a thing in the roof of their mouth that they call the vomeronasal organ, and basically what it allows them to do is detect when a female is coming into oestrus. And because red deer cycle. They're not like sort of dogs or that sort of thing, that they will come into oestrus in cycles over the rut period. Stags will use this to see when there are hinds that are actually in oestrus in the group. The Germans use a wonderful expression at this time of year. They talk about, for the stags, this period of feist, this period of rest. And the stags have now completed the growth of their heads, and as we get towards the end of summer, the shortening of days actually causes the testosterone levels in the stags to rise, and it's the melatonin that increases in the system that causes this. So they've reached peak physical condition, they've achieved everything they can this year, and now as the days shorten, you could say the acceleration into the rut and into the winter survival has begun.
Niall needs to find Thomas one last stag before he flies back to Germany. He spots an interloper, which may mean they have saved the best until last.
Only 230 yards in there. You can see we've put a new fence in at the bottom to keep the deer out of the croft ground. And we've managed to push a lot of them out, and we've culled a lot of them as we've gone, but now we're trying to get rid of the last 2 or 3, because having put a new fence in, if we're not very careful when they start to rut, they'll take this new fence down, or at least they'll tear it apart. So anything we're seeing running the fence at the moment, we're quite keen to get rid of it. Again, we were talking about aging them, and if you can imagine again that circle on his shoulder, you can see the angle he's carrying his head at. He's carrying his head at sort of between 10 and 11. So he's a mature stag, but he's a young mature stag. That stag is no more than 6-7 years old. So he's in his prime. He's certainly the thick end of 24-25 stone in weight.
This stag needs to go, but not today. He comes with a price tag.
We've chosen not to shoot it.
Well, this stag tonight, we've shown it to a client. We've got a group of guys here that you met earlier today. They've very much set a budget on their holiday of what they want to do. For a stag like that, because we put a lot of time and effort into the management, and we have a big winter feeding programme, and we run a fencing programme to keep them out of the crofting ground, there's a value to that stag that we require. So a stag like that, we're looking for the thick end of £2,000 for a beast of that size. And on this occasion, the client decided he didn't want to spend the extra money. But before he damages the fence, and in the next week to 10 days, either Stevie or I will take that with the client.
If he was free roaming, would he?
If it wasn't for the fact that he was on an area of ground that we try and keep deer out of for the sake of the crofters, we wouldn't take that stag at all. That stag would run. He would run for another 3 or 4 years without even being looked at. That stag, yeah, that's an excellent stag.
We leave this marauder and head to the larder to see the heads his clients have already shot this week. Niall has promised to give us the Rowantree guide to antlers. It even involves a whiteboard.
So there's a number of features when you look at stags' heads, and an awful lot of thought and process goes into the selection of stags. I would say right at the outset, it's equally as important that the selection and process of thought with hinds follows the same line of thinking as you have with stags. It goes without saying that 50% of any stag is his mother. But having said that, when we look at stags, there are obvious things that stand out immediately. So we start with this first guy at the top, and we can see here that this stag has started to go back. He's lost an eye in previous years. You can see the empty eye socket there. And this animal has come from the Glenborodale part of the estate. The stags there are naturally smaller anyway than on the main forest, but he's started to go back. So classic features of that: lengthening brow tine. You can still see there's a fairly broad pedicle there, and then as you rise up the antler, the bay point is gone, the tray point is receded and irregular, and the tops have disappeared. So this stag, probably at his best, was never much more than an 8 or 9 pointer, but classically this is a top that's gone back. Now, a simple rule of the road with that stag, and I'll give you a wee diagram here, is if you look at a stag's head and he fits all the corners of that box, there's not a great deal wrong with him. If, however, you can fit a stag's head into that, then it merits a further look. So if you can imagine the brow tine and the top. So those are two simple things when you look at a stag's head. And if we look at that here, and we pick this boy up, we can see very quickly and easily, if you use that as an assessment, that guy has fits in that box there. So we'll look now at the one below him. He's fairly typical of a stag from the western end of the peninsula, but again we've got fairly long brows, we've got irregular short bays. The trays are in reasonably good condition, but one top has disappeared or gone back. This guy's in about his 7th year. But as a good stag, for these gentlemen to have culled and to take home as a memory of the experience, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as a Highland Scottish red stag. And I'm sure if you spoke to the guys themselves, they'll go home and hang that on the wall confident that they've taken part in a sustainable cull of a wild animal in its natural environment. So we'll move on and look at the other guys. We now get into younger stags here. So you're going to see these guys, fairly simple, they've gone back. These guys, they haven't gone back, they've been selected out for other reasons. So this guy here, he's come from Glenbordale again. You can see the points are fairly regular, but he's got an irregular and short top. And against the other stags that he was compared with, and that's the important criteria, against the other stags in the area, he doesn't meet the same high standards that we would expect of a stag of that age class. And that stag is about 6 years of age. Looking down here again, we've got one that's about 5. Features for him, automatically he stands out. He's very narrow, he's irregular, he's got a bay and a tray on one side, he's only got a brow on the other side, and small narrow tops. So these guys, from a management point of view for the herd, absolutely perfect. So the guys that visit us every year and help us to harvest the red deer off the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, the stags they've taken, absolutely perfect. And it's been totally ethical, removed from the herd, and all of this prior to the rut. So there's nothing but benefit to the herd, and there's income and benefit to the community. And let's not miss that. These visiting guys that hunt stags with us every year, they fill hotel rooms, they spend money in the local hotels, so they keep people in employment, and they manage a natural resource sustainably. So for us, in the cycle of our red deer on the peninsula, they're an important part. And then we get to a really interesting one. And people panic these days at the use of the word trophy. Because the instant you mention trophy, people start thinking that you're abusing a resource, you're taking something in its prime. And this is a fabulous stag. For a Highland Scottish stag, that's a fabulous stag. But this particular boy, I've known him for the last 9 years. We know this bloodline. They always grow into good, solid stags. This stag yesterday was a little short of 160 kilos. So that's a big stag by the Scottish Highlands. And in his prime, this stag was a 15-pointer. So when you look at him now, he's a 13-pointer. And he's started to go back. And again, you can see this long brow tine. Always remember that as an indication. If you've not done a lot of red deer stalking and you're in a situation where you're selecting something, this lengthening brow tine, or as the Germans call it, the Eisbrosser, is a classic example of a stag starting to go back. The bay point here is receded a bit. On that side, it's almost receded totally. And then you've got quite often, because later in the summer when there's a bit of growth, you'll get a good kick in the tray point, because by that time it's easier even for an older stag with worn teeth to pull up the nutrients he needs from the grazing. So very often you will get a kick or size in the tray point, so don't let that confuse you. And then when you look at the tops, again you can see this has gone from 2 points into 1. You've got a receding point here and a small top, and on this side that expansion of points here has gone completely. Dark colouring in the antler, fly as a jailer, this old brute. So he spent the early part of the season hiding in the woodlands out the road. As we move into the autumn, this rise in testosterone makes these guys much more mobile. And when we picked this guy up yesterday, he was out looking for ladies. But from our point of view, he'd done his bit for the herd, he was starting to cover his own daughters, and it was time for him to come out of that part of the estate. So well worth calling a trophy and well worth celebrating as an outstanding stag.
The carcasses hang in the chiller next door, ready for the game dealer.
All our venison for us.
They say you can use every part of a pig except the squeal. Well, it's the same with deer.
So here we are, David, we're in the chill, and when we were last looking at stags, they were lying up on the hillside, and we were talking about them growing new antlers, the challenge of coming through the winter. And what's really important when we're talking about deer is to go through the fact that how they are such a seasonal animal, and that they go through surviving the winter, casting their antlers in the spring when the testosterone levels are at the lowest, and then this mad drive through the summer to get themselves into top physical condition for the rut and again for that other period of survival. So when we looked at this boy lying on the top of the hill, and we did look at this stag, we looked at him and he was lying on the left hand side of the group, and we'll come maybe pick him up later on, and we looked at him and he was thin, he was changing winter coat and he looked rough. Here's the same stag hanging there now. This stag yesterday came off the hill with a field weight of 154 kilos. And if we look inside the carcass, you not only see the coat's in excellent condition, we can now see the fat that's built up in this animal over the summer and early part of the autumn. And if you notice there's just very gently a pink tinge starting to show on the fat. Now this guy yesterday was just starting to rake around and look for hinds. But not only is there an excellent product here in meat that's now going to go into the food chain, you can see it's been inspected by the stalkers, it's been signed off as inspected and fit for human consumption. The next journey for this one now is to a processor in Newton Moore, Simpson Game, and Cameron's team will turn this into products and it'll be distributed around the UK. But not all the bits will be distributed around the UK, because earlier when we were filming, we were talking about other products that come from the stags. And on the trolley here, we have stag's pizzles, or his laughing tackle, and these guys go off and get sold in blocks and go into the Chinese market and are considered a food delicacy with, you could say, additional health benefits. I've never tried one. I don't know if I feel a need to, but it's a byproduct, and it's always been known as perks for keepers and stalkers. And an awful lot of the products that come off the deer, like the sinews on the trolleys, the pizzles, and if anybody's taking pizzles for sale, nobody will buy them if they're not attached to the atrial bone. They've still got to be on that bone. I believe it's so they can stretch them and dry them. And the sinews, the pizzles, and the tails, these are all marketed by the venison processors in the UK. So deer have many benefits. You wonder later in life what any of us are worth, but that's worth about €5.
As it's now late in the day, the last stalk is arranged for tomorrow morning, but before enjoying some local ales and cuisine, there's retail therapy.
Apart from the Harris feed and the velvet, also the lining.
Thomas's trip was a birthday gift from his wife, and he wants to return the favour. Local award-winning designer Lorna Gillis has brought some samples of her work to present to the guys at Mingary Castle.
Having people coming up here, especially to shoot on the estate, to come to the estate, it helps the hotels, it helps people like myself reach their market without having to necessarily go to the cities, so London and Edinburgh, for my particular clientele.
Mingary is the jewel in the crown of the estate. After huge investment from the landowner and local support, the castle has opened its impressive doors to paying guests.
There's nowhere else like it in Scotland. What we offer here at Mingary and West Highland hunting. I mean, there's lodges out there, but 700-year-old castle.
And it's yours.
Yeah,
yours.
exactly. This is the drawing room. This is where our hunting groups. So right now we're in September, and we would be not very busy at all, but the hunting is definitely keeping us busy right up towards Christmas. So right into November, December, the hunting bookings are keeping us really busy.
Righto, cheers now.
Of course, we don't want to knock the pounds, euros and dollars that general tourism brings to the likes of Ardnamurchan, but it doesn't bring anywhere near the same amount of money as hunting.
Tourism is harvested in the same way that venison's harvested, in the same way that the silage is harvested. We're looking for something from it all. And about 8 years ago I started a wildlife tourism business to take people out to watch red deer. And I think you've seen that yourself. People actually come to Ardnamurchan to look at their largest wild mammal. And when we look at it, typically a day spent here from a deer stalker is going to be around £700. Whereas typically a day spent from an individual making wildlife tourism is going to be around 30. And these are figures we can substantiate from our own sales. But what we want is we want both. We need the income from the meat, from the tourism, from people just looking at deer, and from people hunting them. You can photograph them an awful lot more times than you can shoot them. And we celebrate our big deer by stags that are in their prime. We don't kill these guys, but we will take people out to look at them.
With the weather on our side, it's time to hit the hill. Neil and Stevie wear nomad clothing as it blends beautifully into this environment. Every little helps up here.
Now the deer are out of sight of us, we're now spending more of our time stalking the sheep. Because if the sheep take off, the deer in shelter see the sheep go, they won't give it a second thought, they'll be away straight away. Because they know if they see sheep running, the sheep only run from one thing.
Our first opportunity disappears over the horizon.
David, are you entirely in view of him?
Our second appears over the horizon and pins us down.
That's a different stag to the stag that came up through the Bella, Thomas. It's a 13 pointer. But again, a good mature stag, about 7-8 years old.
A decision is made to retreat and employ damage limitation.
When we creep forward here, this guy looks in a particularly unforgiving mood. So stick your head flat to the ground, okay? Avoid the temptation to go. It might be all you get to do.
With great relief, Thomas, Neil and camera are all locked onto a contented stag.
We're sitting at 194 yards from the stag. So we've adjusted the binoculars, ranged it, and we've adjusted the ballistic turret on the Leica McInnes scope. So at that distance, Thomas is absolutely smack on. And with the bipod settled down and the Ansel trigger and the Blaser R8, he's absolutely set up. It's time for his moment, his time to shine.
It's a waiting game. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and muscles and joints start aching, bladders start bursting, and that is where it all goes wrong. Thomas's friend heads off for a pee and our stag spots him and lifts. Now it's catch up.
Stag on the left.
Thomas makes the shot.
Our friend behind us made it exciting. Did you crawl away or did you just get up and walk?
No, it's green bubble.
Yeah, I figured, yeah. When the hinds have moved back up the glen when they were disturbed, this fella's cut up onto the top and come and settled on the top of the young stag. We saw him first thing today and we've managed to catch up with him on the top. So there you go, an Ungrada 10 ender. So all we have to do now is get him home and maybe a celebratory dram for the end of the week.
Yeah.
The stag is just what Thomas and Neil wanted, and he's absolutely filthy.
They wallow at varying times of the year for different reasons, but at this time of the year it blackens them up. Black stands out, it's a colour of alarm, it makes them look bigger, and that's the whole reason for doing it.
Getting dressed?
Yep. So basically what he's doing is he's painting himself up to look as big and as awe-inspiring as he possibly can. And they will wallow regularly throughout the rut, and what they will do is where they wallow they'll urinate in it, and they'll also, when they're doing that and they're thrashing their antlers in the hag as you saw him doing there, it also excites the stag, so we'll get them ejaculating on himself and his head and neck and all that thing. So I mean, if you do cut yourself when you're handling these guys at this time of year, always make a point of cleaning the wound thoroughly, because he's pretty minging at this time of year.
A technical term.
Yeah. So what I try and do, grab a bit of moss, and even when you're going to make the bleed hole, give it a clean off. I mean, what you don't want to be doing is introducing any contaminants into the carcass. And again, where you're going to make the incision, just be quite sensible about it and give it a good clean. You can see what's coming off with the moss there. And interestingly, you know, they gathered a lot of the sphagnum moss off the blanket bogs in the Highlands during the First War because they used them for field dressings. Because of their absorbent quality and also because of the antibacterial quality they have. So you might think, oh, it's a bit odd to wipe it with a bit of bog, but it's perfectly adequate for the task in hand.
Stevie returns with the vehicle and the extraction is made. It's the end of Thomas's hunt and the climax of all the work that West Highland hunting have put into this estate, all generating income and jobs. They make sure that the red deer has a value. No value, no deer. And who, in their right mind, would want that? What extraordinary storytelling from the Highlands of Scotland, and there'll be more of that in coming weeks. Thanks to Leica Sports Optics and to Blaser Rifles for supporting the filming. Well, we are back next week. If you haven't done so already, please pop over to our website, fieldsportschannel.tv. You can click to like us there on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. You can subscribe to us on YouTube. Or you can pop your email address into our registration page and we'll contact you about the show. Field Sports Britain, it's out 7 p.m. UK time every Wednesday. And this has been Field Sports Britain. Good hunting, good shooting, good fishing, and goodbye.